Welcome back to Family Shadows, a place where stories of fathers, children, and the fragile threads of family are told with the kind of heart you can only find in life's deepest moments. If you're new here, consider joining us, subscribe, and be part of a community where memory, legacy, and family lessons live on. Today's story is called "My Kids Said Memories Don't Pay the Bills, so I sold the house and kept the legacy." Let us begin. Jonathan Reed was 58 years old when his children told him that memories don't pay the bills. It wasn't said cruelly, not at first. It was slipped into a conversation, the way you might slide an uninvited guest into a family dinner. But once spoken, it grew legs, found its place in the room, and refused to leave. Jonathan had lived in that house for more than 3 decades. The two-story colonial, with its weather-faded shutters and stubborn porch swing, was not much to look at from the outside. Realtors might call it dated. A young couple scrolling through listings might swipe past it with a bored flick of the thumb. But for Jonathan, every corner of that house was alive. The doorway still had the pencil marks etched in fading graphite. Eric's growth spurts measured in sudden, proud inches. Megan's, shorter and more deliberate, marked with her careful handwriting as if to say, "Daddy, don't forget this is me." The kitchen table was still the same one Diana, his late wife, had insisted they buy at an estate sale. Its oak surface was scratched by school projects, stained by Thanksgiving gravies, and warmed by countless conversations. Jonathan could still remember Diana's laugh echoing from that kitchen, the sound carrying through the house like sunlight spilling through an open window. There were boxes of photographs stacked in the attic, birthdays, Christmas mornings, Halloween costumes made by hand when money was tight. And in Jonathan's bedroom, there was still the quilt Diana had sewn in her last year when her hands trembled but her spirit did not. To Jonathan, this wasn't just a house. It was a cathedral of memory. It was the one place where time still bent around him, where his wife's presence lingered, where the story of the Reed family still had walls to lean on. But to his son, Eric, and his daughter, Megan, it was little more than equity. It was a Sunday afternoon when they came. Eric's voice reached the living room first, carried in from the front porch where he stood with the boldness of a man on a mission. "Dad," he said, dropping his keys onto the side table with the air of someone already in charge, "we've been looking at the numbers." Jonathan glanced up from his chair. He had been reading the newspaper, though he hadn't turned a page in a while. He folded it carefully, placed it on the armrest. "The numbers?" he asked. "Yes," Eric said. His hair was cut short, his shirt too crisp for a casual visit. He was 34, but in that moment he carried himself like a financial advisor instead of a son. "This place is, well, let's be honest, it's worth a lot more sold than sitting here collecting dust. You don't need all this space, Dad. It's time." Jonathan felt the words like a gust of cold air. He didn't reply immediately. He looked past Eric to Megan, who stood behind her brother, her arms folded. She offered a small smile, the kind that parents can read as "I know this hurts, but I'm not going to stop him." Jonathan shifted in his chair. "Time for what?" Megan spoke then, softer than her brother. "Time to move on, Dad. Memories, they don't pay the bills." And there it was. The sentence that clung to Jonathan's chest long after it was spoken. The sentence that made the walls of his home feel suddenly fragile. Jonathan did not argue. He had learned long ago that when you meet resistance head-on, you only create more resistance. And besides, what would he say? That this house was worth more than money. That the air inside carried the laughter of their mother. That he still heard Diana's voice in the quiet hours of the night. He could not explain those things, so he listened. Eric launched into figures, what the house could fetch on the market, what condos in the city cost, how much liquidity could be freed up. Jonathan heard the words, but they blurred together like rain on a windshield. Megan nodded along, though every so often her eyes flicked toward her father with hesitation. She was 30 now, her face touched by the gentleness of someone who wanted to believe she was doing the right thing, even as doubt gnawed quietly at her heart. Jonathan only nodded once, then stood up slowly. His knees ached, and he steadied himself on the arm of the chair. He walked to the window. Outside, the old oak tree swayed, its branches creaking. Beneath it, Diana had once spread a blanket for picnics, reading stories to the children when they were small enough to climb into her lap. He pressed his hand against the glass, as if the tree itself might steady him. Memories don't pay the bills. The phrase echoed in Jonathan's mind long after his children had left. He sat at the kitchen table that night, the same table that bore the stains of 1,000 meals, and traced his finger along one of the scratches. Diana had dropped a casserole dish there once, laughing at her own clumsiness. He remembered how Eric, only 6 at the time, had said, "It's okay, Mom, now it's special." Now his son called it worthless. Jonathan thought of bills. Yes, they had to be paid. He was not naive. The roof needed repairs, the taxes were due every year, and pensions only stretched so far. But he also thought of the invisible debts, the kind measured not in dollars but in moments, the nights awake with fevers, the scraped knees, the long hours at work so his children could have shoes without holes. Who had paid those bills? Jonathan had, with his time, his body, his life. And now his children wanted to collect again, this time in bricks and mortar. Jonathan did not sleep much that night. He walked the halls of the house instead, touching the photographs on the walls. Diana's face looked back at him from every frame, her smile as luminous as the day they met. He whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear. "They think memories don't matter, but you and I know better, don't we, Diana?" In that silence, Jonathan made a decision, not the kind you announce, not yet, but the kind you tuck deep in your chest, letting it grow quietly until the moment it needs to rise. For now, he would let his children believe they were right. He would let them think the house was just a structure, that equity was its only worth. But Jonathan Reed was not finished teaching his children. Some lessons, he knew, required more than words. They required action, and this would be one of them. The following week, Eric returned, this time with a binder tucked under his arm. He carried it like a trophy, as if the sheer weight of printed spreadsheets could convince anyone that numbers had the final say in life. Megan trailed behind him, holding a paper cup of coffee. Her expression caught somewhere between agreement and unease. Jonathan was sitting in the living room again, the morning light drifting across the carpet in golden squares. He had been reading one of Diana's old recipe cards, still written in her looping script, chicken pot pie extra time, as though she were leaving him instructions not just for dinner but for how to carry on. Eric cleared his throat. "Dad, we've run the comps." Jonathan looked up, blinking as if adjusting to a foreign language. "Comparables," Eric explained, flipping open the binder and laying it on the coffee table with a thud. Similar homes in the area, colonial style, 2-story, about the same square footage, some a little newer, some older. Average listing price is nearly $420,000. That's a solid figure, Dad. You'd be crazy not to cash in. He tapped the page, the sound sharp against the quiet room. Jonathan let the silence hang. His eyes drifted to Megan, who offered a quick shrug. "He's right, Dad. It's a lot of money. More than enough to downsize, maybe put something aside. Eric leaned forward. His voice grew firmer, confident in his own logic. Look, no one's saying the memories aren't important, but memories don't put food on the table, they don't cover property tax, they don't fix a leaky roof. This house, it's just sitting here decaying. You could sell it, use the money for something useful. Isn't that what Mom would want? The words cut sharper than Eric realized. Jonathan inhaled slowly, holding the air in his chest. What Mom would want. He wanted to tell his son that Diana had never measured life in dollars, that she had stitched worth into the fabric of every small moment. But he saw the gleam in Eric's eyes, the calculation already running, and he knew the words would slide off like rain on polished glass. Instead, Jonathan shifted his gaze back to the binder. The pages were filled with charts, graphs, highlighted numbers. Black and white proof that the house, in the eyes of the market, was only so much square footage and potential profit. Dad, Eric pressed, you could live somewhere smaller. A condo, maybe. Less upkeep. Easier on you. Think about it, no more mowing the lawn, no more fixing the gutters. Doesn't that sound practical? Jonathan's hand rested on the arm of the chair. He felt the worn grooves beneath his palm, grooves carved over decades of use. He thought of Diana's hand resting in the same spot during evenings when they sat together, talking about nothing and everything. He thought of Megan as a little girl, climbing into his lap, curling against his chest, tracing those same grooves with her finger as if they were secret maps. Was that impractical? Jonathan looked back at Eric, whose jaw was set, whose voice carried the certainty of someone who believed he was right simply because numbers told him so. Practical, Jonathan repeated softly as though tasting the word. Yes, Eric said quickly, sensing progress. Practical, sensible, the smart move. The word lingered, heavy, almost bitter. Jonathan felt its weight pressing against the memories embedded in the walls around him. Megan spoke again, her tone more hesitant this time. Dad, we're not trying to hurt you. We don't want you stuck here. This house is a lot. It's too much for one person. Jonathan's eyes softened on his daughter. He could see the hesitation in her, the flicker of something more than practicality. A child torn between loyalty to her brother's certainty and the quiet pull of her own conscience. You think I'm stuck? Jonathan asked. Megan's lips parted, but she didn't answer. Eric filled the silence. Of course you are. Look around. The place is falling apart. It's not worth holding onto just because of nostalgia. Nostalgia. The word landed like a dismissal, as if the love he had lived inside these walls could be filed away in the same drawer as old receipts. Jonathan stood then, slowly, the weight of his years making each movement deliberate. He walked past his children, past the binder with its neat columns and highlighted cells. He moved to the window again, to that same pane of glass overlooking the oak tree. The branches swayed gently, the leaves whispering secrets of summers long past. He could almost hear Diana's voice under that tree, reading aloud to Eric and Megan when their hair was still fine and their feet small. Jonathan spoke without turning. Numbers are neat, they fit on a page, memories don't. Eric rolled his eyes, unseen by his father. Dad, come on. Jonathan raised a hand, quiet but firm. You say memories don't pay the bills. You may be right, but memories built this home. Memories raised you here. Every nail, every board, every mark on the wall, it all holds something your mother and I gave you. The room fell still. Megan lowered her gaze to her coffee cup. Eric exhaled, frustrated, drumming his fingers on the binder. Jonathan let the silence breathe. He knew the argument wasn't over. It would never be over, not with children who measured value in currency instead of history. But he also knew something else, a truth that neither Eric nor Megan yet understood. Sometimes the most practical thing a father can do is let his children learn the hard way. Jonathan turned back, his eyes steady. "You'll get what you need," he said simply. Eric nodded, mistaking it for agreement. Megan's eyes flickered with uncertainty. And Jonathan, quiet, patient Jonathan, carried the cold words of practicality deep into his chest, where they began to smolder like coals waiting for the right moment to catch flame. That night, after Eric and Megan had gone, Jonathan lingered in the living room long after the lamps should have been turned off. The house had a particular quiet when no one else was inside it, a silence that wasn't empty but waited, as if the walls themselves held their breath. He sat in his armchair, hands folded, staring at the faint outline of Diana's quilt draped over the back of the sofa. The television remote sat on the table beside him, untouched. He could have turned it on, filled the silence with some late-night sitcom, but he didn't. He let the silence stay. He could almost hear Diana's voice in it. "John," she used to say, "sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could." He wondered what she would say now if she had been in that room earlier, listening to their children talk about the house as though it were a stock to be cashed in. He tried to picture her reaction, her brows furrowed, her lips pressed tight in that way she did when disappointment and sadness collided. Jonathan rose slowly and walked toward the staircase. He paused at the base, running his fingers along the banister. The wood was worn smooth from decades of hands, little hands sliding down, giggling, sometimes sneaking out of bed when they thought their parents wouldn't notice. Halfway up, he stopped, listening. The house creaked faintly, settling into itself the way it always had, like an old friend stretching its limbs. He imagined Diana whispering back to him in those creaks, "Don't give it up so easily, John." He climbed higher, past the children's rooms, now empty and stale with the scent of abandonment. Megan's old posters still clung to the wall, curling at the corners. Eric's desk still had a faded sticker from a baseball team he once adored. Jonathan didn't step inside, he just looked, letting the sight press against his chest, then moved on. At the top, he pulled down the attic ladder. Dust swirled into the dim light as he climbed. The attic was cramped, cluttered with boxes labeled in Diana's handwriting. Christmas, one read. School projects, another. Jonathan sat on the floorboards, his knees groaning in protest, and pulled a box closer. Inside, stacks of photo albums, thick leather-bound ones Diana had insisted on keeping. He opened one, and the scent of old paper rose like a memory. The first photo was of Eric's 5th birthday. There he was, grinning, frosting smeared across his cheeks, Diana kneeling beside him with her arm around his shoulder. Jonathan touched the picture gently, his fingertip tracing the outline of Diana's smile. He turned more pages. Megan on her first day of school, clutching a backpack too big for her small frame. Eric in his little league uniform standing stiffly with pride. Vacations that had cost them more than they could afford but were worth every penny. Every page whispered, "This is the real wealth." Jonathan closed the album and pressed it to his chest. He sat there in the dim attic, the wood creaking under him, and let the weight of it wash over him. The house was more than timber and shingles. It was a vessel, and even if his children could not see it, he knew. Sleep did not come easily. Jonathan lay in bed, the quilt Diana had sewn spread over him. His fingers traced the stitches, uneven in places where her illness had made her hands shake. He remembered her determination to finish it anyway. "It'll keep you warm," she'd said, smiling through the weakness. And it had, but it did more than that. It kept her near. Jonathan stared at the ceiling, the shadows shifting as the night deepened. He replayed his children's words over and over, the way they had spoken with such certainty. Memories don't pay the bills. Perhaps they were right. Bills demanded payment in dollars, not in stories. The bank would never accept an old photo in place of a mortgage check. But Jonathan couldn't escape the deeper truth pulsing beneath their cold practicality. If memories didn't matter, then what had all those years been for? The long hours he had worked, the sacrifices he had made, the nights he had gone without so that his children could have more. It had all been for the life lived inside these walls. For the laughter at the dinner table, the birthdays, the scraped knees, the whispered prayers beside sick beds. Those weren't bills to be paid. They were debts of love already settled. And yet his children couldn't see it. By dawn, Jonathan rose from bed, weary but clear-eyed. He padded down to the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat again at the oak table. He didn't write anything down. He didn't make lists or calculations. He simply sat and let the weight of decision settle. He would not fight them, not with words. He knew his children. Eric's mind was fixed on numbers, on charts and figures that seemed to tell a complete story but never did. Megan's heart was softer, but her loyalty to her brother would keep her silent. Arguing would only harden them further. No, Jonathan would let them believe he agreed. He would let them push the sale forward, convinced they had won. He would carry the burden of their misunderstanding in silence, because sometimes silence was not surrender, it was strategy. He thought of Diana again, of what she would want him to do. Not to shout, not to demand, not to cling desperately. She had always told him, teach them by showing, John, not just by telling. So he would show them. He would show Eric and Megan what legacy truly meant, even if it broke their assumptions wide open. He would carry the heavy heart of silence until the time was right. And when that time came, his children would learn a lesson they would never forget. The for sale sign went up on a Wednesday morning. Jonathan had not touched it himself. The realtor had done that, a cheerful young woman with bright lipstick and the energy of someone who saw every house as a potential commission. She had shaken Jonathan's hand, her smile wide, and said, "This will move quickly. A house like this, so much charm. Buyers love charm." Jonathan had nodded, though inside the word charm felt cheap. Charm was a feature in a catalog. What stood on his lawn was history. Still, he said nothing. He let the process move forward. Eric was pleased. He handled most of the details with the realtor, speaking in a brisk, efficient manner. He treated the house not as the place that had raised him, but as an asset waiting to be liquidated. "This is the right move, Dad," Eric told him more than once, patting Jonathan's shoulder as though consoling him. "Don't worry, we'll take care of everything. You'll see, it'll be easier once this is done." Megan was quieter. She signed papers when Eric handed them over, but her eyes wandered the rooms differently. Once, Jonathan caught her standing at the bottom of the staircase, staring at the faint pencil marks still visible on the wall. Her lips parted as if she might say something, but she didn't. She just pressed them shut again, signed where Eric pointed, and looked away. The first open house came on a Saturday. Jonathan stood in the backyard out of the way, while strangers wandered through the rooms. He listened to them comment, their voices muffled through the windows. "Oh, it's dated, but with some renovations it could be lovely. Kitchen needs an upgrade, maybe knock down that wall. These old floors could be refinished. Adds value. Adds value." Jonathan leaned against the oak tree, staring at the window where Diana used to wave to him while she cooked. He imagined strangers tearing down the walls, gutting the kitchen, sanding away the very floor that had carried his children's first steps. To them, it was potential. To him, it was sacred. When the families left, Eric came outside, his tie loosened, a smile tugging at his lips. Good turnout, a couple of serious buyers already. Jonathan only nodded. The packing began soon after. Boxes stacked along the hallway labeled in Eric's rushed handwriting, dishes, linens, misc. Jonathan did most of it in silence. He moved carefully as though each item carried weight beyond its size. When he lifted the photo albums, he paused. He opened one, flipping through the pages quickly at first, then slower, and stopping altogether. Megan found him once sitting cross-legged on the floor, an album open on his lap. The photograph showed her as a toddler sitting in Diana's lap, cake smeared across her cheeks. "Dad," Megan said softly, "you okay?" Jonathan closed the album and nodded, just remembering. Megan hesitated. She crouched beside him, resting a hand on his arm. Her eyes glistened for just a second before she stood, brushing her palms against her jeans. "Eric's waiting on those boxes. We should keep moving." And just like that, the moment dissolved. Day by day, the rooms grew barer. The laughter that had once filled them seemed to seep into the boxes, carried away piece by piece. Jonathan's bedroom was stripped to its essentials: the bed, the quilt, a single lamp. The children's rooms lost their character as posters were torn down, old toys tossed into bags, furniture hauled away. He walked the hallways at night, the echo of his footsteps sharper against the emptiness. Without furniture, the house sounded different, hollow, almost offended at being reduced to bare walls. Still, Jonathan did not protest. He let the silence build inside him. The day of the closing arrived. Jonathan sat at the long oak table in the realtor's office, a pen in his hand, documents spread before him. Eric sat beside him, practically humming with satisfaction. Megan sat across, fidgeting with her necklace. "Sign here," the realtor said, pointing with her manicured nail. Jonathan signed. His name looked strange to him on the paper, smaller than it should have been. "Here too." He signed again, page after page, until the last one was complete. The house was no longer his. Eric clapped him on the back. "You'll see, Dad, this is for the best." Jonathan only folded the pen neatly, placed it down, and nodded. The moving truck pulled up to a small house on the edge of town, a one-story place with peeling paint and a yard just big enough for an oak sapling. It was not much, but it was enough. Jonathan stepped inside, carrying a single box. He set it on the counter, then looked around. The rooms were smaller, the ceilings lower, but he could feel the possibility here. Not the kind Eric would count in dollars, but the kind that mattered to Jonathan. Space for memories to breathe, even if the world thought them impractical. He unpacked slowly, beginning with Diana's quilt, spreading it across the bed. Then the photo albums, stacking them neatly on a shelf he built himself. Each item found a place, and with each placement the new house began to carry echoes of the old. It wasn't the same, no, but it didn't have to be. The essence of home was not in the walls, but in what you chose to preserve. Jonathan sat that evening in his new chair, the window open to let in the breeze. He closed his eyes and whispered into the quiet. "We're not done yet, Diana, not by a long shot." And for the first time since the sign had gone up, he smiled, not because he had lost, but because he knew the story wasn't finished. Jonathan adjusted slowly to the small house on the edge of town. At first, it felt almost foreign, its walls too bare, its floors too quiet. The first few nights, he woke with the disorienting feeling that he had lost something not just tangible, but essential, as if a limb had been cut away. He would sit up in bed, Diana's quilt pulled around his shoulders, and listen to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of cars rolling down the highway. But little by little, he began to carve meaning into the new space. The first thing he did was plant the oak sapling in the yard. He dug into the soil with steady hands, his breath fogging in the early morning air, and placed the young tree firmly in the ground. He stood back, dirt clinging to his shoes, and whispered, "Grow strong. Someday they'll see." Inside, he set up shelves and carefully arranged the photo albums he had carried with him. He built the shelves himself, measured the planks, cut them, sanded them smooth. There was a quiet satisfaction in it, the kind he had always found in building. Each album found its place, lined neatly, a library of a family's life preserved in leather and paper. The rooms began to feel less hollow. Jonathan placed Diana's quilt on the bed, her recipe box on the kitchen counter, her favorite lamp beside his chair. These were not just objects. They were anchors, holding her spirit in the new walls. During the day, Jonathan began making trips into town. He carried with him a folder of documents and an idea that had been simmering since that night in the attic, when he held the photo album against his chest. At the community center, he met with a director named Mrs. Thompson, a gray-haired woman with a no-nonsense voice but kind eyes. Jonathan explained his plan. He wanted to establish a fund, a scholarship for young people who couldn't afford college but wanted to learn a trade, carpentry, plumbing, mechanics, the kinds of work that built lives with steady hands. He wanted to call it the Diana Reed Foundation. Mrs. Thompson listened carefully. When he finished, she reached across the table and touched his hand. "Your wife must have been a remarkable woman," she said softly. "She was," Jonathan replied. His voice caught on the word, but he steadied himself. "She believed in building, not just with wood or nails, but with love, with patience, with sacrifice. I want her name to keep building even now." Mrs. Thompson nodded. "We can make this happen." Together, they went through paperwork, setting up the trust, arranging the logistics. Jonathan signed forms with a steady hand, feeling a quiet power in each stroke of his pen. The money from the sale of the house, what Eric and Megan thought would become their inheritance, was being funneled into something far greater. It was not an act of revenge, though it carried the sting of one. It was a lesson, a way to show his children that legacy was not cashing out memories but multiplying them into futures. In the evenings, Jonathan worked on another project. He borrowed a scanner from the library and began digitizing the family photographs. Slowly, page by page, he placed each picture on the glass, watched the light sweep across it, and stored it on a hard drive. He uploaded the images into folders: Eric's childhood, Megan's childhood, holidays, vacations. Each folder grew, a mosaic of their lives stitched together with pixels. Jonathan spent hours writing captions beneath the images, little notes Diana had once said, memories only he would remember. Under a picture of Eric in his baseball uniform, he typed, "You struck out twice that game, but your mother said you looked like a champion anyway." Under a photo of Megan in a Halloween costume, he wrote, "You cried when the mask slipped, but Diana kissed your cheeks and said you were the bravest ghost in town." When he was done, he arranged for the collection to be turned into a digital album, something that could be sent to every relative, every cousin, every branch of the family. It would not be locked in a dusty attic. It would live on, permanent, untouchable. One night, as Jonathan sat at his small kitchen table with the laptop open, He paused on a photo of Diana. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the sun catching in her hair. He leaned back in his chair, the glow of the screen illuminating his lined face. "Diana," he whispered, "they don't understand, but they will. Someday they'll see what you and I built. Not just a house, not just walls, a life, a legacy." He closed the laptop gently as if it were fragile. Meanwhile, Eric and Megan continued with their lives, convinced their father had quietly surrendered. Eric even boasted to a friend over the phone that he'd finally gotten Dad to see reason. Megan checked in occasionally, asking how the new house was, but she never pressed. Jonathan answered simply, "It's small, but it's enough." They didn't ask questions about the money. They assumed it sat in an account, waiting to be divided when the time came. And Jonathan let them assume. Because sometimes silence was not surrender. Sometimes silence was the sound of a plan taking shape. Jonathan sat in his armchair one evening, Diana's quilt across his lap, the oak sapling swaying just beyond the window. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The house might have been smaller, but his vision had grown larger than ever. The foundation was forming. The digital album was nearly complete. Piece by piece, he was building something his children could neither spend nor erase. And when the day came when he finally revealed it, they would learn what legacy truly meant. Thanksgiving arrived with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pies drifting through the Reed household. Not Jonathan's small house, but Eric's suburban home, modern and glossy, with granite countertops and polished hardwood floors that seemed to gleam like a showroom. Jonathan arrived carrying a simple dish, mashed potatoes the way Diana had once made them, heavy with butter, topped with just a hint of paprika. He set the dish down on the counter and greeted his children with the quiet warmth that had never left him, even when their words had cut deep. "Dad," Eric said, giving him a firm pat on the back. "Glad you made it. Looks like traffic didn't kill you." He laughed at his own joke, already moving back toward the kitchen, barking small orders as if he were the general of this feast. Megan came forward, hugging her father softly. "I'm glad you're here, Dad," she whispered, and there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease, of tenderness, that she quickly hid behind a polite smile. The table was set with careful precision, candles lit, glasses polished, silverware aligned as if the arrangement itself spoke of control and success. Family members gathered around, cousins and uncles and aunts, the noise of chatter filling the air. Jonathan sat quietly at his place, the mashed potatoes steaming in front of him, and listened. It didn't take long before the subject came up almost casually, like a stone skipping across water. "So, Dad," Eric said, carving into the turkey with dramatic flair, "how's the new place? Cozy enough?" Jonathan nodded. "It's enough." That's good," Eric replied, his voice swelling with satisfaction. "And you know the sale was smart, really smart, liquidating at the right time. The market was hot. You must have gotten a great price." Several relatives nodded approvingly, as if Eric had just made a savvy investment on behalf of the family. Jonathan took a sip of water, letting the silence stretch. Megan shifted uncomfortably, twirling her napkin between her fingers. "Yeah, Dad, it must feel like a relief, not to have all that history weighing you down." The word history landed heavy, as if it were something burdensome instead of something sacred. Jonathan set his glass down slowly. He looked around the table, faces expectant, curious, some even admiring Eric for his role in convincing the old man to sell. And Jonathan knew this was the moment. Jonathan reached down beside his chair and lifted a leather-bound folder. It was worn at the edges, unassuming, the kind of thing most people might mistake for a billfold or a set of personal papers. He placed it gently in the center of the table. Conversation stuttered and fell quiet. The clinking of silverware stilled. All eyes turned to him. Jonathan folded his hands and spoke softly, his voice calm but steady. "You're right," he said. "The house sold well, more than I expected, enough to change lives if handled carefully." Eric's eyes lit up. "Exactly what I was saying. See, we did the right thing. That money." Jonathan raised his hand and the room went silent again. "I've already decided what to do with it." Eric blinked, caught off guard. "You what?" Jonathan slid the folder closer to him. "Open it." Eric hesitated, then flipped it open. His confident expression faltered. Inside were not bank statements or division plans, but formal documents. Legal paperwork stamped and sealed, bearing the name in bold letters. The Diana Reed Foundation. Jonathan's voice filled the stillness. "This foundation," he explained, "will provide scholarships for young people who can't afford college but want to learn a trade: carpentry, mechanics, nursing. The kinds of work that build a life, the kind your mother and I always believed in." He turned his gaze around the table, letting his words sink in. "Every dollar from the sale has gone there, to her name, to her memory, to something that will outlive us all." Gasps rippled across the relatives. A cousin murmured, "That's incredible." Eric's face darkened. "Dad, are you kidding me? You gave it all away to strangers." Jonathan's eyes held his son's without flinching. "Not strangers, futures. Children like you once were, needing a chance. That money will build more than walls, it will build lives." Megan's fork slipped from her hand, clattering against her plate. Her eyes brimmed, caught between shock and something softer. But Jonathan wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, reaching again into his bag. This time he pulled out a sleek USB drive and set it beside the folder. "And this is for family." "What is it?" Megan whispered. Jonathan smiled gently. "Your lives, digitized, every photograph, every memory your mother and I kept. Labeled, preserved, shared with every branch of the Reed family. It will live on untouched, unbroken. You may not think memories pay the bills, but they feed the soul. And that, children, is worth more than any dollar you could have put in your pockets." The room was hushed. Relatives leaned forward, moved by the quiet dignity of Jonathan's revelation. Some nodded in admiration, others whispered to each other, already speaking of Diana Reed's name living on in scholarship programs. Eric sat rigid, his knuckles white around his fork. "So we get nothing," he said flatly. Jonathan met his gaze, his voice calm as stone. "You get everything that matters." Megan covered her mouth, tears sliding down her cheeks. Jonathan looked at her, his tone softening. "You understand, don't you?" She nodded through the tears. "Yes, I do now." Jonathan turned back to the table, his eyes sweeping across the family. "Legacy is not something you sell. It's something you keep, something you pass on. Your mother knew that, and now so will you." The candles flickered, the turkey grew cold, but the weight of Jonathan's words lingered like a blessing, or, for Eric, like a sentence. Thanksgiving had begun with chatter and pride. It ended with silence and revelation, and Jonathan Reed sat quietly at the head of the table, no longer the man his children thought they could control, but the father who had just taught them the lesson of their lives. Eric's fork clanged against his plate as he set it down with a sharp, metallic snap. The sound cut through the silence of the dining room like glass breaking. His face flushed red, his voice rising louder than the hum of whispered relatives. "So that's it," he demanded. "You gave away the house. Every penny. two to strangers in some trade school, and we get nothing." The words spilled hot, bitter. His jaw tightened and he pushed his chair back an inch as though putting physical distance between himself and his father's revelation. Jonathan did not flinch. He sat with his hands folded, the leather-bound folder still resting calmly in front of him. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, so quiet that the room leaned in to hear him. "You get everything that matters." Eric scoffed, a humorless laugh bursting from his chest. "Everything that matters? Don't give me that poetic nonsense. You sold the house, the one asset you had worth anything, and instead of taking care of your own family, you poured it into a charity. You let Mom's name be used for strangers while your own children are left with empty hands." Jonathan's eyes did not waver. "Your mother's name will build futures. That is not empty." Eric leaned forward, jabbing a finger at the folder. "That money was ours, ours. You had no right to throw it away." For the first time, Jonathan's tone hardened, though he did not raise his voice. "No right." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Eric, I worked 40 years of my life. I built this family. I paid every bill, carried every burden, buried the woman I loved, and raised you both under that roof. Don't talk to me about what I do or don't have a right to. That house was never your inheritance. It was never a prize to be claimed. It was our story, and I chose to give that story a future." The room held its breath. Megan's eyes brimmed with tears. She had been silent for much of the conversation, caught between her brother's fury and her father's stillness. But now her voice trembled into the quiet. "Eric, stop," she whispered. Eric turned to her, incredulous. "Stop. He just cut us out, Megan. Everything we thought gone. Don't you care?" Megan wiped her cheeks, shaking her head. "I do care, but not about the money." She turned to her father, her voice breaking. "Dad, I didn't understand. When we pushed you to sell, I thought," she faltered, choking back a sob, "I thought it was just a house, but it wasn't. It was everything. And you found a way to keep it alive even without the walls. I see that now." Her words cracked the tension. Some relatives nodded, some murmured in agreement. A cousin whispered, "She's right." Eric stared at her as though betrayed. "So you're taking his side?" Megan met his gaze with newfound strength. "No, Eric, I'm finally seeing the truth. We were wrong." Jonathan leaned back slightly, his eyes glistening, his voice low and even. "I never meant to punish you," he said. "I meant to teach you. Money disappears, houses crumble, but legacy is what endures. Your mother knew it. She lived it every day she raised you, and now, through her name, she will continue to raise others. That is wealth no market can buy." He let his eyes rest on Eric. "You say you're left with nothing, but look around you. You are left with every memory your mother and I gave you, every sacrifice we made, every lesson written into your bones. That is not nothing, that is everything." Eric's face contorted, torn between pride and shame. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the hardwood floor. He stood, his fists clenched at his sides. "You'll regret this," he spat. Then he stormed from the room, the door slamming behind him. The echo rattled the glasses on the table. Silence followed. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Megan reached across the table, her hand trembling, and placed it over her father's. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, "for everything I said, for not standing up sooner." Jonathan covered her hand with his own, the warmth steady and reassuring. "You see now, that's enough." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I do. I see it." Around the table, the relatives slowly began to speak again, not about money, not about inheritance, but about Diana, about memories of her kindness, her laughter, her belief in lifting others. They spoke of the foundation with reverence, some even offering to contribute to volunteer. The room shifted, the air lighter, as if Diana herself had walked among them once more. Jonathan sat quietly, his hand still holding Megan's, his heart heavy but full. Later, when the plates were cleared and the candles had burned low, Jonathan stepped outside onto Eric's back porch. The night was crisp, the stars sharp against the dark sky. He pulled Diana's old scarf tighter around his neck and breathed in deeply. He thought of Eric's anger, of Megan's tears, of the weight that had hung over the table like a storm cloud. He thought of the future that now bore Diana's name. And he whispered into the night, "They'll understand, Diana. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday they will. And when they do, they'll know you never left them. Not really." The oak sapling in his new yard, the scholarship fund taking root, the digital albums waiting to be shared, it was all part of the same truth. Jonathan Reed had not lost his family story. He had preserved it. And in time, his children would learn that shock was only the first step toward understanding. Because true legacy is not in what you keep for yourself. It is in what you give away that endures. Jonathan returned that night to his small house at the edge of town. The Thanksgiving table still lingered in his mind. Eric's fury, Megan's tears, the stunned silence of relatives hearing the truth. He carried it all with him like a heavy coat he couldn't yet take off. When he stepped inside, the house greeted him with a softer silence than the one he had known in the old place. The walls were plain, the floors unmarked, but the shelves lined with photo albums, the quilt on the bed, the little lamp on the table, they filled the space with a warmth that no blueprint could measure. He walked to the window. Outside, the oak sapling shivered in the breeze, its thin branches reaching upward like hands stretching toward the stars. Jonathan pressed his palm against the glass. "One day," he whispered, "you'll be as strong as the tree that shaded our children." He sat down in his chair, pulling the quilt across his lap, and opened the laptop. The digital album was ready. He clicked through the folders. Eric's childhood, Megan's childhood, holidays, vacations. Each picture appeared like a heartbeat on the screen. Diana holding Eric's hand on his first day of school, Megan blowing out candles, cheeks puffed in delight. Jonathan himself, younger, stronger, grinning at Diana from across a picnic blanket. As he clicked, he felt it. The house he thought he had lost had never left. It lived here in these memories, in the foundation that bore Diana's name, in the quiet endurance of his love. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the stillness wash over him. Eric's anger would linger for a while, he knew. Pride was a hard stone to crack, but someday, his son would understand. Megan already had, and perhaps one day when she raised children of her own, she would tell them the story of the house her father sold, only to keep the legacy alive. Jonathan smiled faintly. He wasn't afraid of time anymore. Time would carry the lesson forward. The house was gone, yes, but the heart of it, Diana's laughter, the children's footsteps, the nights of sacrifice, the mornings of love remained. And that was enough. Thank you for listening to this story from Family Shadows. If it touched you, if it reminded you of your own parents, your own home, your own memories, know that you carry a legacy too. Please remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. From my heart to yours. May you and your loved ones always find warmth in your memories, strength in your family, and peace in your homes. Wishing you health, happiness, and a family full of love. Until next time, this is Family Shadows.